Today, I'm going to be driving a car which should appeal to, well, no one. You see, if you want an electric car for driving in the city, you're unlikely to want a car with a Jeep badge. And if you want a Jeep, you're unlikely to want a small electric city car. Which means that this Jeep Avenger could be the biggest flop since I tried to jump in the hotel swimming pool this morning. And that would be a shame because it's really, really good. The car, not my diving skills. I know a lot of people will object to the idea of SUVs in cities on principle, but if you think about it, a shrunken Jeep makes perfect sense in an urban environment, especially if it's powered by electricity like the Avenger. You sit higher, which gives the better viewpoint that we all seem to like, and although it's no monster truck, it has more ability to cope with potholes which litter our streets. While bits of black trim on the outside make any normal hatchback look like the sort of base model you get handed at the rental car desk on your holiday, on a Jeep they make it look butch. Which is good news when a delivery van scrapes them, as they're easier to fix, or at least they won't look as nasty with a scratch on them. You should be able to park it without too many scrapes though, as the Avenger is very much one of those cars which is smaller than it looks in the pictures. It actually has the same footprint as a Vauxhall Corsa or Volkswagen Polo. It's actually got about 5 centimetres more ground clearance than a typical hatchback though, and the bits of the body which overhang in front and behind the wheels are unusually small. While that sort of thing is useful if you're driving on a rougher road than you'll find on the school run, it will also mean you'll worry less about speed bumps, roadworks and big puddles. So what about the bits underneath? Well, the Jeep Avenger shares its basic hardware with cars like the Vauxhall Mockery and the Peugeot 2008 because the companies and the brands are all one big happy family now and they like to share the love, or the components at least. But this is like a version 2.0 of those components. Everything's been honed and improved to make it a little bit better, including a new electric motor and a 52 kilowatt hour battery. It means engineers have been able to eke out an official range figure of 248 miles, which equates to 4.6 miles for every precious kilowatt of charger juice you put in. That's really efficient, even for a smallish car like this. But if you choose a version with the bigger wheels, it knocks about 3 miles off that total. Now, those range figures are normally nonsense, of course. You don't pay any attention because they're done in a lab. But on this car, I'm actually getting about what it says I should. So my total range should be 245 miles. And I've been driving on motorways and on these kind of twisty roads. So it is sort of 20 degrees outside, which is the ideal temperature for an electric car. But this car does have a heat pump as standard, so even in winter, it might not be that bad. That can be £1,000 option on some rival cars. Like the Mokka and 2008, the Avenger has a 100 kilowatt maximum charging speed on a suitable DC rapid charger, which means that you can have a 10 to 80% charge in under 30 minutes, or a 100-mile top-up will take about 20 minutes, in the right conditions. Plug into a 7 kilowatt home charger and the Avenger will be fully charged in 8 hours. It will also take 11 kilowatt AC, which is handy if you have access to faster points at work or in a public car park. It means you'll be able to get more miles in while you're parked at the supermarket, for example. When you're ready to drive, you might be surprised at how much fun the Jeep is. It's meant to be an SUV and you expect those to wallow around and you don't expect them to be a hoot on twisty roads like this. But actually, there is a little hint of mischief about the Jeep that makes it quite good fun. But it's also refined. So there's a little tyre and wind noise and more than you get in, say, a Volkswagen ID3 when you're on the motorway. But around here it soaks up the bumps well, it's not noisy, and I'd be quite happy doing a long journey in this. The steering's nicely weighted and you can change the modes again if you want it to feel a bit more sporty. And the brakes, and I'm in a B mode here, are strong and don't have any sort of strange feeling that you can sometimes get with electric cars. It's not what you'd call fast though. The motor's 154 bhp is noticeably less than the 200-ish, which is the norm among rivals, and the acceleration is adequate rather than impressive, especially when you're pulling onto a motorway. What is unusual is that the Avenger has a magic button which changes the drive modes. On some cars, this just changes the colour of the instruments or makes a growling noise through the speakers, but on the Avenger it actually does stuff. You don't get the full 154 bhp unless you're in Sport, or if you floor the accelerator pedal. Otherwise you're left with 107 bhp if you're in normal, or 80 if you're in eco. That's kind of city car power in a car which is comparatively heavy, so it can cause a few squeaky moments on uphill sections of motorway. Now there's one big talking point about the Avenger, and it's not about the range or the price or anything else. It's the indicator noise. Listen. Can you hear it? It sounds like a kind of 80s Casio synthesizer, and you kind of expect the vocal track to kick in at any moment. Now, I can't work out if I like it or not, but it's certainly a bit odd, but I'm convinced that YouTube will be full of remixes of that tune very shortly, with people adding backing tracks and things. If you want to add a link to your efforts, then feel free in the comments. That's not the only bit of tech either. Nestling in this big panel of body colour on the dash is a 10.25-inch touchscreen which has decent graphics, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, plus a built-in TomTom sat-nav. Oh, and over-the-air software updates too. The switches are all logical, with a simple row of aircon buttons underneath the screen too. That might seem like the basics, but no one told some rivals. Volkswagen. Now this Jeep isn't pretending to be a hardcore off-roader, not least because it's only got two-wheel drive, although there is a four-wheel drive version on the way. I'm not sure if that's going to be electric or hybrid, and no one's telling me yet. But there are, in amongst these drive modes for the normal, eco and sport and etc., there are different versions of a thing called Select Track, which is Jeep's four-wheel drive traction system. It means you can select different modes for the traction control based on if you're on sand or snow, and it's meant to maximise the amount of grip you get in those surfaces. But what the extra ground clearance means is that on these roads where there are big drop-off curbs and things, I'm not so worried about this car, and it's actually working quite well, although there is a little bit of wheel scrabble when you're pulling away from sandy lay-bys. Other than the looks and ground clearance, this is the only nod to off-roadiness, which isn't what you might expect from a car wearing the Jeep badge. It's only got two driven wheels and road bias tyres, so it's only like to be a little better than any other small hatchback in the snow or a muddy festival field. It can't tow anything either. Anyway, back to the inside. It might be a small car, but there's plenty of space in here for most drivers to get comfortable, and there's loads of stowage space for you to put your Haribo and lose your keys maybe. Look at this as well. Be familiar to anybody who's got an iPad. A car of this size isn't going to have the space of a big SUV, of course, but I think that the Avenger's 380 litres of luggage space is very usable. It's about the same as a Volkswagen ID3, for example. It's certainly big enough to take a pushchair or a couple of bags. And this boxy shape means there's a good height to the space, which is ideal if you've got a dog or an IKEA purchase to carry around. There's also a false floor which can be flipped over to give a white clean surface if you're carrying muddy boots or a wet dog. There are hidden handles for the back doors to confuse people you're giving lifts to, and getting through the small opening can be tricky if you're tall, chubby or less mobile. 2 out of 3 in my case. The battery has been shaped around the rear passenger foot space, so it's surprisingly roomy in the 2 outer seats. It's as big as a Corsa-sized hatchback, but not even close to a Volkswagen ID3 or Kia Niro in the back. So don't buy a fleet of Avengers if you're starting up a chauffeur company for professional basketball players. So what about the price? Is that small too? Not really. The entry-level Longitude model starts at $34,800, while the poshest Summit will cost around $39,100. Add a couple of option packs and it means your Avenger could end up costing more than a Tesla Model 3. I thought I'd mention it before someone with a username consisting of lots of numbers said it on the comments. So that's comparable to cars like the best-selling Kia Niro EV or the Hyundai Kona electric. But these sorts of cars are always sold on their finance deals, and they change with the prevailing wind. So check out electrifying.com for the latest on all those sort of monthly prices. It might seem like I have a bit of a downer on the Avenger, and I don't. I really like driving it, and I think everything about it is really well judged. It offers chunky SUV looks in a city-friendly package, and decent efficiency too. It's surprisingly practical, and it should even have a little bit of off-road ability without the compromises which that normally means you're forced to make. So I can see why you might want a Jeep rather than a blander brand. I mean, nobody wants to play with like toy Kias or have a Renault lunchbox on their Christmas list, do they? Also, weirdly, this car is currently a little bit cheaper than its sister cars from Vauxhall and Peugeot, and that suddenly makes this unappealing car quite appealing.